Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first University of Maine Cooperative Extension's Preserving the Maine Harvest webinar of 2022. I'm Kathy Savoy, and we will also be joined today by two other colleagues, Kate McCarty, live in our demo kitchen, and Vina Lindley. We are back with another series of webinars designed to provide you with current USDA recommendations while you are preserving foods at your home. Our monthly webinars will feature in-season foods corresponding with the Maine growing cycle throughout the year. The mission of UMaine Cooperative Extension is to help Maine people improve their lives by providing research-based knowledge focused on relevant issues and needs. Our educational programs are vast and include agriculture, home horticulture, which includes the Master Gardener Volunteer Program, 4-H youth development, food safety, as well as nutrition. We want to let you know that the University of Maine is prohibited from discriminating on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, disability, and reprisal or retaliation for prior civil rights activity. Today's webinar will be focused on common ingredients that you will see used in home food preservation. We're going to discuss why these ingredients are needed and what can go wrong if you don't use the right ingredients. First, some housekeeping. We do have our webinar set up so that you can see and hear us, but we cannot hear or see you. But we do want to hear from you, so please use the Q&A box to ask questions, and we will have time throughout our webinar to field those questions. So you'll see that the Q&A feature is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So thanks so much for joining us, and let's get started with our first 2022 webinar. So whether you're a novice or an experienced canner, you may see an ingredient in a recipe or on the store shelves and think, what's that for? Is that new? Or why does it matter that I use it? Pectins, salt, crisping agents, acids like vinegar and lemon juice, they all do have a particular role in preserving, whether it's to affect the flavor, appearance, or the safety of your preserved foods. We will review a few products you'll see sold or called for in a preserving recipe and hope to be able to help you sort out why it does matter to use a particular product. So we're going to start talking about pectin. Since it's strawberry season here in Maine, which is very exciting. So pectin is a naturally occurring thickening agent that is derived from fruit. It is responsible for the set or the gelling property of jam and jelly, creating a product that does get gelled and is also spreadable versus having a runny product more like a syrup. When fruit pectin, sugar, water, and acid are heated and then cooled, the mixture thickens into a gel. At the store, you will find a variety of commercial pectins to use when making jams, jellies, and preserves. While jams and jellies can be made without adding any additional pectin, if you choose to use a commercial pectin, it will help to ensure that the product will gel, and you're also apt to avoid having a runny jam or an overset jam that is actually too stiff to spread on your yummy toast. These commercial pectins come in full and low sugar versions. Each pectin packet comes with its own set of directions specific to creating jam or jelly with that product. You cannot substitute one pectin for another. So it is very important to take some time to understand the directions that come in the pectin packet and to follow those directions so that you are assured success as your outcome for your jam and jelly. So typically, full sugar or classic pectins require about equal parts fruit and sugar. These will make a lot of very sweet jam or jelly. And some people do like that. But if you are looking to reduce your added sugar intake, you can use, or to use an alternative sweetener like honey, maple syrup, or Splenda. You need to make sure that you select a pectin that is formulated to gel with less or no added sugar. These products include things like Ball, low sugar or no sugar pectin, Sure Gel, less or no sugar needed pectin, and also Pomona's pectin, which is a product that can be found at your local natural food store or health food store or online. Another specialty product you will see recommended when canning and freezing is called an ascorbic acid dip sold as Fruit Fresh. Now, this product is used to prevent fruits with light colored flesh from browning. Think about what happens to apples, pears, peaches, apricots, and the like. Typically, these fruits will darken once they're peeled and exposed to air. So use ascorbic acid to prevent that browning from occurring. The browning is harmless, but ultimately it is unsightly on your home canned fruits. A commercial ascorbic acid product known as Fruit Fresh will keep that cut fruit, the cut peeled fruit, from oxidizing. That's the term used for browning. So you create a dip from powdered ascorbic acid and place your peeled and cut fruit into it as you work. Ascorbic acid is really just vitamin C. So if you already have tablets at home or can't find an ascorbic acid dip, you can make your own dip from 6 500 milligram tablets of vitamin C, crushed and dissolved into 1 gallon of water. Don't worry about writing down or remembering those numbers. We will send you a resource that has this specific recommendation in it. So next up, we're going to talk about some common ingredients you'll see recommended when pickling. We're not quite at pickling season yet, but let's talk about some of these products so we're ready for when those pickling cukes and other vegetables arrive. So home canned pickles are very satisfying to make and eat and have a number of specialty products that are associated with them. The most common ingredient you'll see recommended when pickling is called canning and pickling salt. This is a pure granulated salt that doesn't have any additives like an anti-caking agent to prevent our salt from clumping on our humid days to come. And it also does not have iodine in it. These two additives, the anti-caking agents and the iodine, can cause your brine to turn cloudy or your pickles to darken, which can be confused as signs of spoilage. You'll find this salt with the canning supplies or in the spice aisle at the grocery stores. So we are now going to switch gears and jump into the demo kitchen and join Kate, where she will be giving us some information about different brines made with different types of salts. Kate?
Yes. Hello, everyone. We are going to talk about the different types of salt that Kathy mentioned. So I did a little sample of 2 different brines using 2 different salts. One is the traditional table salts that you would purchase that, like Kathy mentioned, has that anti-caking agent in it. So it does not dissolve completely clear. So that's this sample. And hopefully you can see against the dark background of my apron that there is a little bit of that cloudiness to the brine still, even though the salt's completely dissolved in it. And then the canning and pickling salt, by comparison, is going to dissolve completely clear because it doesn't have any additives. It's just salt. So this, again, is beneficial not only because it looks nice. So consider your local county agricultural fair. If you want to enter your canned goods into the fair for judging, this would give you an advantage to give you that crystal clear brine. But it's also important for you to know that it is not to be mistaken for a sign of spoilage. So if you use traditional salt with any additives and you do end up with cloudy brines, you might come down to your pantry shelves and say you're going to open up a jar of pickles a few months after you can it and notice this cloudiness and think, well, is that because they've gone bad because something happened? Or is it simply because I used that table salt? So we want to remove that variable. We don't want you thinking that your food is potentially spoiled. So the canning and pickling salt will achieve that, take out that cloudy aspect and give you this beautiful clear brine. The salt is widely available and it is just salt. So if you think, this is too much of a quantity to have on hand, you can use it in your regular cooking or any other canning recipe that calls for it, where the transparency of the brine might not matter. You could use it in salsas or to season your canned vegetables and the like. So it's widely available, inexpensive and versatile. So we hope that you pick that. All right, so now back to Kathy for some more about salt.
All right, well, we're going to get the slideshow back up, which it looks like it is. Thank you. And we're going to talk a little bit about some other salts. And we get these questions a lot, so it was an important topic for us to bring into this discussion. What we're talking about are other salts like sea salts and kosher salts. They don't have additives either. But the concern with those is that they can measure very differently when we're looking at our teaspoon, tablespoon, or cup volumes that are added to our pickles because of the crystal size that they come in. And this can result ultimately in undersalted pickles, which can be a concern from a food safety standpoint. Salt plays an important role in fermentation. So if you're fermenting pickles, it's important to measure the salt precisely. So for those reasons, we recommend you use canning and pickling salt when pickling, whether you're making those great quick pickles with vinegar, or if you're looking to develop flavor and acidity through the fermentation process. We are going to discuss both of these methods, the fermentation process as well as quick pickling, in our July webinar. So be sure to sign up for that one if you're looking to learn more about pickling. Vinegar is another important ingredient when quick pickling. Look for a label that says 5% acidity to ensure the safety of your home canned pickles. Remember, don't use homemade vinegars as the acidity varies and may not create a safe final product. White vinegar is usually the default vinegar when pickling, as it is a very neutral flavor, but you can use any vinegar you like as long as it does state 5% acidity. We encourage you to try apple cider vinegar in your sour mustard pickles or bread and butter pickles. Might add a different flavor and one that you do like. Several commercial products for creating crisp pickles are available. Extra Crunch Pickle Crisp is a calcium chloride product from either Mrs. Wages or Ball. Calcium chloride helps to firm the pectin in the cucumbers, helping it to maintain some crunch. With each of these products, you add it directly to the jar before you add your spices or vegetables into the jar. Follow the directions provided on the product. It is just a scant, or it's just an 1/8 of a teaspoon, which is a very small amount of the product per pint jar. We did a little demonstration, little experiment one summer in our demo kitchen and found that the jars that had pickle crisp added really did maintain a crunch more than the jars without it. So that's just some input from us from our demonstration kitchen. Let's talk about some other traditional firming agents. Pickling lime is up first. It is a crisping treatment that is no longer recommended. It was recommended to soak your pickles in and required several thorough rinses to safely remove the product before canning. So we now recommend, along with the National Center for Home Food Preservation, other ways to keep your pickles crispy and to not use the pickling lime. Alum, A-L-U-M, is another outdated recommendation for pickling. It is and was only ever recommended to use with fermented pickles, but as long as you follow proper canning procedures, you shouldn't have any issues with soggy pickles. We're going to jump ahead and talk about acidulants or acidification of tomatoes. Lemon juice is used in canning primarily to acidify tomatoes. The USDA recommendation to acidify tomatoes came out in 1988. And this was based on a growing concern that tomatoes were not acidic enough on their own. All home canned tomatoes require acidification. This includes tomato juice, crushed tomatoes, standard tomato sauce, and tomatoes canned, whole, or halved. You can accomplish acidification by adding lemon juice, citric acid, or vinegar. You can see the recommendations are for citric acid, bottled lemon juice, or vinegar, specific to, again, that 5% acidity. You simply need to add the amount that's shown in the slide of acidulant per jar size prior to filling that jar with tomatoes. So for example, if I'm getting ready to pack up a pint jar with whole tomatoes and I'm using bottled lemon juice as my acidulant, I will use 1 tablespoon of bottled lemon juice into that pint-sized jar before I add my tomato products. This will safely acidify the tomato volume. Please note, citric acid is not ascorbic acid. You cannot use these two products interchangeably. You must use bottled lemon juice, not fresh squeezed lemon juice. Bottled lemon juice has a standard identity for pH, whereas fresh squeezed lemon juice does not. And please notice that if you do choose to use vinegar, the amount is much higher in volume than the other two acidifiers. And some people do not like the taste change that that creates. You can offset this change in flavor by using a small amount of sugar. Sugar does not change the pH, but it will help to improve that flavor that vinegar may impart in the tomatoes. Lemon juice is available at the grocery store, while citric acid can be found with the canning supplies or through retailers that sell cheese-making supplies, because citric acid is also used in the cheese-making process. So now that we've covered common ingredients used in food preservation, let's discuss the equipment that you'll need. And it's always important to not only know what type of equipment is needed, but before the season starts, take a good look at the equipment that you may already have on hand and make sure it is up to par. Make sure it hasn't rusted or anything over the winter. The lid fits accurately, all those sorts of things. So if you are looking to can high acid foods, and this would include things like jams, jellies, pickles, acidified tomatoes, you'll use the boiling water bath, and that's shown here in this picture on the slide. This is a big pot with a rack in the bottom that is deep enough to fully submerge your jars in the water, and also has enough water volume to have 1 to 2 inches of water over the tops. And then you also want to have at least 1 to 2 inches left over so that the boiling water isn't spilling over the top of the pot. So we get a lot of questions about, what does the canning rack actually do? Well, the canning rack does provide an important role in helping to keep the jars off the hot metal surface, which could cause the jars to break as they boil. But it also helps keep the hot water circulating around the jars to assist in that convection method to allow the heat to penetrate into the jars more efficiently. So the rack does play an important role. You can purchase a relatively inexpensive canner, about $20 to $25, that comes with a rack in the bottom and is nice and deep. And you can find these at hardware stores, big box stores, and also online retailers. You can also make a boiling water bath canner out of a pot that you may already have on hand. Think lobster pot or corn steamer. You just need to have a rack that fits in the bottom. Perhaps a round cake cooling rack or even a trivet will help serve that purpose. Ball does make a silicone rack that will fit in the bottom of any 9-inch pot that you may have. You may see advice that says you can use the screw bands to act as a rack, but in our experience, it's just not very effective as the jars are unstable and can tip over. So it is really best to find a dedicated rack that fits securely in the bottom of your canner. Make it easy for yourself when you're in the kitchen. Ball also started making an electric boiling water bath canner in 2015. It is the most expensive option for this type of canning, about $170, but it really is a nice appliance. Some things that we love about it are that it doesn't heat up your kitchen as much as your stovetop will. And it also has a spigot, which you can see shown in the picture, which allows you to drain the hot water into your sink after you're done with your canning. So it makes that a lot easier to do than carrying your boiling water bath over to the sink after the canning's done. So take those things into consideration when you're deciding which type of equipment you're going to use this year. An atmospheric steam canner can also be used to can high acid foods. Atmospheric steam canning is the process of using boiling water below the jars, which allows the steam to come up and heat the jars. This style canner can be used for acidic foods that have a processing time of 45 minutes or less. And the atmospheric steam canner is shown in that picture. The advantages to using an atmospheric steam canner are that they use much less water to heat than a boiling water bath. So they result in less of your time spent waiting for water to boil. So they are also ultimately considered to be much more energy efficient. Brands of atmospheric steam canners that we are aware of include Victorio and also Back to Basics. You may have luck finding these items at large department stores, hardware stores, or online. They each come with their own set of directions, and I would encourage you again to take the time to read those directions and then also save those directions. I like to put them in a plastic bag to keep them from getting wet from all the work that I do in the kitchen, because it's great to refresh yourself on their directions each canning season. The other type of canner is a pressure canner. A pressure canner uses steam under pressure to safely can low acid foods like vegetables, meats, and poultry. Remember that a boiling water bath simply does not create a hot enough temperature to destroy the C. botulinum spores that can thrive in a low acid environment. The temperatures that are reached in a pressure canner are over 240 degrees because, again, they are steam that is under pressure. Pressure canners have one of two types of pressure regulators, a weighted gauge or a dial gauge. This refers to how the pressure is regulated. So the weighted gauge is a small weight that is placed over the vent pipe and allows pressure to build inside. The weight rocks or jiggles once the proper pressure is achieved and maintains a steady pressure through its own self-regulation. These weights are always accurate and don't need to be checked annually for accuracy and never need to be replaced unless, of course, you lose one. Then there's the other type of pressure regulator, which is the dial gauge. In this case, the canner is sealed off after the venting process and the pressure builds inside the chamber. The pressure registers on the dial gauge mounted on the lid of the canner, and you control the pressure with the heat of your stove. So there is a little bit more babysitting that's involved with this dial gauge pressure canner. Also, it takes a little practice to master this. Plus, the dial gauge needs to be tested annually for accuracy. The University of Maine Cooperative Extension offers this service for free, and we will include the link on how to access that free service in your resources that you'll receive after this webinar is over. So now we're going to talk about canning jars. The recommended style of canning jar is the typical glass mason jar that you're probably all familiar with. These jars are tempered to withstand the temperature of boiling water, as well as repeated heating and cooling. They can be reused as long as they are not chipped or not cracked. You can buy them where canning supplies are sold, grocery stores, hardware stores, big box stores, and even craft stores carry them. And both Kate and I have seen a very healthy and robust supply of canning jars at a lot of these places this year. So if you experienced jar shortages in 2020 and 2021, hopefully you'll see that the supplies are back to what we normally expected them to be during the canning season. We do not recommend you use jars that are not made for home canning or that are outdated. So we're referring to commercial spaghetti sauce jars, mayonnaise jars, jam jars, anything that has a one-piece lid or a wire bail and glass lid. These jars are prone to breaking. They are only intended for single use, and or in terms of the ones that have been outdated, like the wire bail glass cap, you just do not know if they have sealed properly, if they have actually created a vacuum seal when we use them in home canning. So again, that's just increasing the risk that can be problematic in home canning. So the recommended lids have two parts. They have the flat dome lid and the screw band. The dome lid has a food grade plastic liner that Ball now makes as BPA free, and it has a button in the middle that is pulled in when a vacuum seal forms. So this is a great visual indicator that your jar has sealed and is safe for long-term storage. However, if the button isn't depressed, that can take up to 24 hours after canning, you know that you need to take action. You can reprocess it, you can refrigerate it, or you can potentially freeze your jar of preserved foods. The dome lids are recommended for one-time use only, as the sealing compound, that orange part that's around the dome lid, becomes compressed during storage when you have a vacuum seal, and it might not seal the next time around. Fortunately, lids are inexpensive and available next to canning jars. So once you've made that initial investment into a case of jars, you only need to buy new lids every time you want to can. The screw bands are also reusable. Just make sure to check that they're not dented, they haven't developed rust. Bands are removed when we store our home canned goods. And why? And we get this question a lot. Why do you remove the screw bands when you're storing your home canned goods? And that is because they can, in fact, trap moisture in the screw band. They can rust onto the jar, and they can also hide any signs of spoilage in your jars. So that dome lid has created a vacuum seal, and that is the safest way to store your jars, just with the dome lid on it. Other canning equipment you'll need is 3 tools: a jar lifter, a jar funnel, and a headspace measurer or bubble freer. These tools are all used when filling jars to help you get the hot jars in and also out of the canner, to fill the jars and to measure the headspace, which helps the jar seal properly. These 3 tools can be found as a kit made by Ball or sold separately where canning supplies are sold. So we're gonna jump back into the kitchen and spend some time with Kate. She's going to show us how to use these canning tools when filling a jar. Kate?
Thanks. I just want to note too that we're winding down our content. So if you have questions on something we said or something that you know of that we didn't cover, now would be a good time to plug those into the Q&A box. We'll have time for questions after I go through this little demonstration here. So the 3-piece kit from Ball, like Kathy said, you can find it. I've seen it at the grocery store, but hardware stores have it. You can get it online, of course. And these tools are also sold separately as well. But if you don't have any of them, I say just grab the kit because then you have everything you need. So the first one is a jar lifter. And this will help you get your hot jars in and out of the canner. So when you start your canning process, you preheat your jars by boiling them upright, empty, sitting on the rack, completely covered with water, or you preheat them. So you don't need to boil them, but bring them to a simmer, the water to a simmer, so they're nice and hot. So then while you're preparing your canning recipes, your jars are hot in the simmering water in the canner. And to fill your jars up, you'll need to retrieve them from the warm water of the canner. So these canning tongs will help you take a jar out safely. They're curved, and at first people aren't very confident with these, but they have a nice strong grip as long as it's underneath the threads of the glass jar. They won't slip out, and of course the harder you grip, the stronger it is. And there's a curved end, and then these little round handles. I see a lot of first timers try and use it upside down as well, so that the curved round end fits around the jar for the best grip. So you'll ferry 1 or 2 jars out at a time to work with filling. We just recommend you do a few at a time so things don't cool down too much. And then you'll begin filling your jars. So the next tool that comes into use is the funnel, which will help you get your food into the jar instead of all over the counter. Oh, and speaking of the counter, once you take your jars out, we recommend putting them on something. So I've got a dish towel here. This protects the thermal shock of taking a hot jar and putting it directly on your cool counter. Could cause it to break. So I just do a simple dish towel or a sturdy cooling rack or something to protect it from the relatively cold counter. So your funnel goes in the jar. You'll ladle your product in, just eyeballing it up close to the top. And once you're relatively close to the top with your product, remove the funnel and then measure the headspace. So the headspace is the amount of space you leave at the top. Your canning recipe will tell you how much space to leave, and it's measured in only fractions of an inch. So that's where the headspace measurer comes in to ensure that it's accurate. It's important to get the headspace correct so that you help the seal form in the canner. If you leave too much space, it won't be able to push all of the air out, and you'll have an under-processed and therefore unsafe final product. And if you overfill it, it could leak out as it expands and prevent a seal from forming. So for this pretend product, I'm going to do a 1/2 inch of headspace. The notches on the end of this tool measure 1/4 inch. So that means it will just go up to the second step from the bottom. So we rest that on the rim of the jar, and then where it pokes down into the jar should be level with the top of both the food and the liquid that you filled your jar with. So you get down and look at it from the side and really make sure that it's level. You need to take a little out. You can use a little teaspoon to take a scoop out or add a scoop in. That's easier to do than using the clunky ladle at this point. So measure your headspace. If it's 1/4 inch, it's just the first step up from the bottom. That's typically for jams and jellies. Things like salsas, applesauce, pickles, other high acid foods are 1/2 inch. And then when you're pressure canning, frequently it's 1 inch, which is the step closest to the top. So that's the headspace measuring tool. The other end of this they call a bubble freer. So this is where if you're packing pieces of fruit or vegetables into a jar and then pouring liquid over them, like pickles or fruit with syrup or tomatoes and water, air can get trapped under those produce pieces. And if they are left in the jar and put in the canner, they can come up to the top and mess with your carefully measured headspace, or they can cause the bottom of the jar to break out if they don't have a way to get out. So we want to make sure they rise up to the top by just running the other end of this headspace measuring tool around the outside of the food in the jar real gently so you don't bruise your food too much. And then give your headspace one last check just to make sure if you did disturb any air that the headspace is still accurate. So I'm happy with that. And so we'll not use any tools, but go through the remainder of the jar filling process here, where you'll wipe off the rim of the jar. You can use a clean, damp, or dry paper towel, depending on how sticky your product may be. And then you're going to apply one lid. So sometimes they might stick together if they're sitting in a pile. So make sure you only have one. And then the screw band, and the canning recommendation you'll see written as to tighten this ring until it's fingertip tight. So using only the strength of your fingers. If you over tighten it, the jar could break or the lid could buckle. And that would then rule out this tool that we see sometimes sold as a jar wrench for tightening jars. You can really easily over tighten the lid if you were to use one of these. So some of the other brands of kits will come with this tool, but we just recommend you put it in your garage and use it out there because it does not have a place in home canning anymore. Another outdated tool is the magnetic lid lifter. So Ball used to recommend that you would preheat your lids. They thought that softened this compound and made for a better seal, but they've done more research and found that's not necessary. So this little tool was to get the lids out of the warm water and onto your jar, but you don't need this one either. And then once your ring is on fingertip tight, you can use your tongs again, your jar lifter, to vary it back into the canner. And then the last thing you need is our recommended resources. So a tested recipe from a trusted source. We recommend the USDA is the research that all of the recommendations we deliver to you today are based on. So this is the complete guide to home canning from them. It covers high acid foods, low acid foods, and freezing. And then the So Easy to Preserve is from the University of Georgia. They have a great website. We'll send you all of these as well as links to their website so you can access all this content online too. This covers canning, freezing, and dehydrating. And then one that most people know in association with home canning is the Ball Blue Book. So we recommend you use a relatively new edition. This is the latest one, the 37th edition from 2018, I believe. So you don't want to use anything that's much older than 5 years, just because they update the recipes that are in there as well as the processes. So make sure your resources up to date from a trusted source. We don't recommend, blogs or Facebook groups, as popular as they are, because we really want to see the research behind these recipes. All right, so that is the end of my spiel, and I'm hoping we can answer your questions now.
And we do, in fact, have 2 questions in our Q&A box. So please, if you still have an unanswered question, go ahead and enter it in the Q&A box, but we'll start off with these 2. So the first one comes from Krista, who asks, I've seen reusable lids at the store. Are any of them safe? So they have not been researched. So we do not have the research to back that they are safe. Some of the name brands that I'm familiar with for reusable lids are the Tatler lids, and they are, again, not recommended because they do not have the research to back them up as far as their safety for storage over time. So, and then our second question comes from Becky, and she asks, I'm interested in what will happen if I reduce the sugar in a fruit jam without pectin. I know sugar helps the product set, so it may turn out a bit looser, but will reducing the sugar have any impact on the safety of the product for long-term shelf-stable storage? And Becky, and everyone, the answer is yes, there will be a food safety concern if you choose to cut back on the amount of sugar that is in a jam or jelly product, whether or not it has pectin in it. Sugar provides an important role from a chemical standpoint as far as helping to reduce the amount of water that is available in a jar of jam or jelly. So sugar actually binds with the liquid that is in the fruit or the juice that is being gelled, and it holds it so that it is not available for molds, yeast, and bacteria to grow on. So if you were to reduce the amount of sugar in your recipe, what you're then doing is freeing up that water, that liquid, to be available for molds, yeast, and bacteria to grow on. So you have greatly increased the risk of spoilage in a jar of jam and jelly. So again, we tell everyone, make sure you're following research-based recipes and that you follow the instructions directly. If you are looking to cut back on the amount of sugar, just switch to one of those lower sugar pectin products. And again, there's the Sure Gel, there's the Pomona's pectin, and then there's also a Ball product that's out there that is a lower sugar option. Oh, we've got some other questions. Let's see what else we got in here. Can you stack processed jars in the pantry or store them horizontal in a first in, first out roller shelf? I would encourage you to not put them in a horizontal position, but I have seen them stacked and I don't think that there's a problem with that, but I would avoid putting them in a horizontal position. Another question, I heard that you can use an Instant Pot for canning. Is that true? And we have colleagues out in Utah and another state that have looked into that, because you are correct that they do advertise that Instapots can be used for canning. And the research has shown that no, they should not be used for canning. The research was done at higher altitudes, but we will, follow the guidance that came out of that research and say that no, you really shouldn't be using Instapots for canning. And let's see, which type of canning jar can be used in the freezer without fear of cracking? So what happens when you freeze something is that it expands when it freezes. So if you've got a regular mouth-sized jar that has that narrower neck, that is a potential cracking point for the jar. So anything that has a straight side, so those wide mouth canning jars, those are great to use for freezing. Just leave adequate headspace so that the contents of the jar have a place to go when they do freeze and expand. Let's see. What's an encouraging ingredient for let's see. So I think jams and jellies are an easy product for someone who's a beginner. And strawberries are in season. So I'd say if you're looking for a good first time product to can, jams and jellies might be a good way to start. I do have the weighted pressure canner. Is it possible to blow myself up? So there have been some concerns in the past using old, outdated pressure canners. Rest assured that today's pressure canners have a lot of safety features added to them, including an overpressure plug, as well as both a manual engaged lock and then a temperature sensitive lock. So pressure canners have come a long way, and they are much safer than they have been in the past. Follow the directions that come with your pressure canner, and you should be good to go. And we're gonna wrap up our time here. We want to point out to you that here are the recommended resources. You will get all of these in a follow-up email along with our program evaluation that we will, if you complete it and include your mailing address, we'll send you a free headspace measuring tool. And know that we'll be back next month to discuss pickles. And you can see many of the ingredients and equipments that we showed you today in action in our webinar on July 21st. We'll be sure to share the registration information for our next webinar via email, as well as those resources that we mentioned today. So thank you for joining us. And we are going to thank those of you who submitted questions. And we hope to see you next month. So Kate in the demo kitchen, goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.